together. I rolled over to face Gary, my heart pounding in my chest. "This is a lot less awkward than I thought it would be," I said softly, my voice laced with a hint of longing. "I like cuddling with my boy." "I like it too," he confided, his eyes meeting mine, a hint of unspoken desire in his gaze. When Brad and Jessica were done in the bathroom, I told Gary to use it next. I showered and put on my red swim trunks, feeling a surge of confidence as I admired my reflection in the mirror. Gary used the bathroom last and came out wearing a new bikini. "What do you think?" I asked, my voice a playful purr. I wagged my hips in a saucy way, enjoying the way his eyes widened with surprise and admiration. "Jesus, Amy, that's hot," he exclaimed, his voice thick with desire. The small triangles held my chest, and the bikini bottom was cut very low. I turned around, and he saw that the back only covered a fraction of my tight little butt. "It is hot," Jessica agreed, her eyes sparkling with envy. Brad put his eyes back in his head and rolled his tongue back into his mouth. "Yeah, it's hot," he simply said, his voice a low growl. Both girls giggled and I hugged Gary, feeling a thrill of excitement run through me. The beach was full of pretty college girls, but in that bikini, I attracted a ton of attention. Guys eyed me with lust as I sauntered around until we found an empty patch of sand for our blankets. A big group of college kids were having a splash battle in the ocean. The four of us quickly joined in. The splash battle intensified. When Jessica and another girl jumped on Brad and pushed him underwater, he came up sputtering and everyone laughed. In retaliation, several guys tackled their girlfriends and dunked them. I advanced on Gary and he looked worried, but still smiling. "Gary, don't," he begged, laughing as he tried to back away. I jumped, cleanly knocked him off his feet, and dunked him with a big splash. I helped him back to his feet and kept my hands on his waist to steady him. He pushed his wet hair out of his face. "Sorry," I apologized. "I couldn't resist." "It's okay, this is fun," he replied with a smile. He leaned against me to whisper in my ear, "I'm glad you're here, Gary. I couldn't relax and enjoy myself with anyone but you." "I'm glad too," I replied, my voice a soft murmur. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, a sense of connection that went beyond the boundaries of mother and son. The splash battle wound down, and the others were headed for the beach. I let go of Gary and we followed. We spent most of that day doing the usual beach stuff. Sunning, reading, trying to ride the little waves, throwing a frisbee, taking walks. I played and had as much fun as any of the young college kids. I really did fit in with them. It made me proud of myself. The girls wanted to get dressed up that night. Brad and Gary just wore khakis and polo shirts, but we learned the girls shopped together before the trip. They had matching little black dresses. They were sleeveless and the neckline dropped low. The dresses were tight and short too, ending only a few inches down their thighs. Very sexy. I whistled. "Wow, you ladies are gorgeous," I complimented, my voice a playful tease. "Yeah, babes, you look great," Brad agreed. Jessica gave him a kiss, so I smirked at Gary and planted one on his lips too. He didn't flinch or anything. He was a good kisser. I happily took Gary's arm, and we went to a nice restaurant for dinner. We went to a nightclub after. The club was an upscale one. They played American standards music like Sinatra, and it was all slow dancing. Brad and Jessica went right on the floor to dance, but Gary wasn't confident in his ability, so he didn't ask me. I kept looking at him, expecting him to ask me, but he just watched the others. A big heavy guy who looked like an offensive lineman came right up to me and said, "Come on, babe, let's dance." He took my hand and pulled me toward the dance floor. I looked back at Gary, but he didn't know what to do. I didn't want to stop him from dancing and having a good time if he wanted to. The guy drew me into his arms and danced me into the crowd. I tried to keep an eye on Gary, but the other dancers got in the way. 2, then 3 songs passed and Gary didn't return. I started to get mad. Mad at myself for not asking him to dance and at him for leaving me here alone and dancing with that guy. Gary came back into view and I rushed out to him. "That's enough," I told the guy, my voice laced with a warning. He sneered at me. "Beat it, wimp, the girl is with me. If you don't take your hands off my wife, I'm going to break your nose," Gary threatened, his voice low and dangerous. The asshole looked like he wouldn't mind a fight, but I told him, "Thank you for the dances, Frank, but my husband will take over now." To his credit, he backed away without a fight. I had a little smirk on my lips that annoyed Gary. I gathered him in my arms and danced with him. He leaned in, pressing the full length of his curvy body against mine, and whispered in my ear, "What took you so long?" "What?" I asked, confused and still mad. "What took you so long to get me away from that guy? I'm your wife this week, honey. You shouldn't let other men dance with me." I stared in his eyes but couldn't figure out if he was teasing me. "I thought you..." wanted to dance with him. He shrugged, but his eyes sparkled merrily. He was enjoying this, but I had no idea what was going on. "I wanted to dance with you, but he asked and you didn't," I explained, "and you know how much I like to dance. You shouldn't have let me go with him." "I shouldn't?" I shook my head. "I'm your wife. You need to assert yourself." He had his hands all over me. I was still smirking. "I know," he groused. "I can't believe you let him do that." "I expected you to stop him," I replied innocently. "You're my big, strong husband. You're supposed to protect me." He blushed, ashamed by his inaction. "Sorry," he apologized. I giggled and nipped his earlobe with my teeth. "It's okay, I think you learned your lesson." We stayed at the nightclub for hours. The music wasn't my favorite, but I have to admit that slow dancing was a hell of a lot of fun after Gary taught me some basic steps. Gary stayed in my arms the rest of the night, mostly swaying on the dance floor, but also with my arm around him while at our table. I used the restroom once, and damned if some guy wasn't chatting up me when I got back. I possessively put my arm around Gary's waist and glared at the guy. Gary kissed my cheek and told him, "This is my wife and we're going to dance again." Out on the dance floor, I complained, "What the hell, Mom? I'm gone for a minute, and you're flirting with some guy again." I gave him that smirk. "I wanted to see what you'd do, and you passed with flying colors, darling." I kissed him gently. Don't worry, I wasn't going to dance with him. It didn't look that way to me. Seeing her flirting with men really pissed me off. She was married and my mom. "Don't sulk, Gary," I chastised. "If you're going to act like a petulant little boy, then you should go back to the hotel and I'll find a real man to dance with. It would be easy. Half the men in here are eyeing me like a piece of meat." Gary's eyes widened, and a flicker of jealousy crossed his face. "No, Mom, I'm sorry. I don't want you to go back to the hotel. I'll dance with you. I'll be a good husband." I laughed, a light, tinkling sound. "That's my boy, now let's dance." And so we danced, our bodies swaying in rhythm to the music, our hearts beating in sync. It was a strange and exhilarating dance, a dance of mother and son, wife and husband, a dance that blurred the lines of reality and fantasy. And in that moment, I felt a thrill of excitement, a sense of freedom that I had never known before. The rest of the week was a blur of sun-drenched beaches, late-night parties, and stolen kisses. Gary, bless his heart, was a natural at playing the role of my husband. He was protective, attentive, and surprisingly good at keeping up the charade. He even managed to convince Jessica and Brad that we were a real couple, even though our honeymoon phase seemed to be more intense than most. We spent our days swimming, sunbathing, and exploring the city. Gary was surprisingly adventurous. willing to try anything I suggested, from jet skiing to parasailing to even trying a shot of tequila at a beach bar. He was a good sport, always willing to make me laugh, even when I was pushing the boundaries of what was considered normal for a mother and son. The nights were even more exhilarating. We went to clubs, danced until our feet ached, and shared whispered secrets under the moonlight. Gary was a surprisingly good dancer, and I found myself enjoying the close proximity of his body, the feel of his strong arms around me. It was intoxicating. This forbidden pleasure, this blurring of the lines between mother and son, wife and husband. There were times when I felt a pang of guilt, a flicker of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? Was this all just a fantasy, a dangerous game? But then I would look into Gary's eyes, see the love and admiration reflected there, and all my doubts would melt away. He was my son, yes, but he was also my confidant, my best friend, and in that moment, my husband. One night, after a particularly wild party, we found ourselves back at our hotel room, the air thick with the scent of tequila and sweat. We were both exhausted, but the excitement of the night still buzzed through our veins. Gary was sprawled out on the bed, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and deep. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him, my heart pounding in my chest. He opened his eyes, and a lazy smile spread across his face. "You're beautiful, Mom," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. "Don't call me Mom, honey," I whispered, my voice a soft purr. "I'm your wife." He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. Yeah, your wife." He reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek. "I love you, Amy. I love you too, Gary." I leaned in, my lips meeting his in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. It was a kiss that transcended the boundaries of mother and son, a kiss that spoke of a love that was both forbidden and intoxicating. The kiss deepened, our bodies moving closer, our breaths mingling in a symphony of desire. I felt a surge of excitement, a sense of forbidden pleasure that I couldn't resist. I knew this was wrong, but it felt so right. I was lost in the moment, lost in the intoxicating embrace of my son, my husband. We moved to the hotel room, the air thick with anticipation. We were both drunk, our inhibitions lowered, our desires heightened. As we undressed, our hands trembling with excitement, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. This was wrong, I knew it, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't resist the pull of his body, the heat of his gaze. The act itself was a blur, a whirlwind of passion and tenderness. I felt a mixture of guilt and excitement, a sense of liberation that I had never known before. It was wrong, I knew, but it felt so right. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated passion, a moment that transcended the boundaries of mother and son, wife and husband. In the aftermath, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I felt a mixture of guilt and relief, a sense of confusion that I couldn't quite understand. But I also felt a sense of connection, a bond with Gary that was stronger than ever before. The next morning, as we drove back to Memphis, a strange silence settled over us. We both knew what had happened, but neither of us spoke about it. The guilt hung heavy in the air, but it was overshadowed by a sense of shared intimacy, a secret that bound us together in a way that nothing else could. Back in Memphis, life returned to its normal routine. Mark was happy to see me, but he didn't ask about my trip. I didn't tell him about the details, about the kisses, the dancing, the way Gary had looked at me. It was our secret, a shared experience that bound us together in a way that nothing else could. And as I watched Gary walk away, his back straight, his head held high, I knew that our little adventure had changed us both. We were no longer just mother and son. We were something more, something special, something that defied definition. And that was okay. Because in the end, love is love, no matter what form it takes.